bit more of a discussion. So, all right, I think that setup will work. I just need my water.
Yeah, so we're, Jared, thanks for joining me, but we wanted to have a discussion format talking about, and it's basically like downstream from my own conversation earlier where, we've outsourced a lot of the function in terms of cultural continuity, culture building, the cultivation of not only people, but societies, communities, even up all the way to nations. And part of that, of course, is developing the cultural awareness of children. Education, as all of us probably accept, is not something that should only be focused on children. We're always being educated all the time. In our daily lives, we're absorbing the things around us. Every institution exists within our periphery. They're producing content that we're absorbing. They're helping to shape our moral sensibilities. And for those of us, all of us in this room are probably pretty well bolstered in terms of being able to recognize what is subversive and what is helpful. Children obviously are not. They're more in the state of early development, and they need mechanisms within their reach that can help them absorb meaningful culture. So we talk a lot about education, and all of us realize that the whole K through 12, here's a list of facts that you have to memorize over 12 years. That model is not working. It doesn't prolong culture. In fact, it helps to degrade it. I mean, people are taught, even if they're taught good things, right? They're just taught a bunch of facts. They're all disconnected. They have no soul development. There's no development of the mind. So then in Christian circles, there's alternatives. Instead of teaching secular history, we'll teach Christian history. And what that looks like is a bunch of Christian facts instead of secular facts. But where's the formation of the souls? And so that's one of the things that I'm really interested in. We just instinctually outsource the formation of souls to the technopoly. I mean, that's what we do. That's the things that are around us on a day-to-day basis are, generative of the education of children. So just taking a bird's eye view, stepping back and looking at what does education mean, what is its purpose, and how do we subjugate the educational infrastructure into our more general cultural views and cultural vision. I mean, that's one of the things that we've lost. Culture in our time, they pretend like it has nothing to do with education, but in reality, that should be the purpose of education. It was just to cultivate and therefore to enhance culture. So that's one of the things that we wanted to talk about. But there's broader things too. In Christian circles, people talk a lot about the importance of apprenticeships and getting, boys should be in shops and they should be on farms and they should be learning how to have practical skills. But why? Is it because the purpose of education is to help them get good jobs, make lots of money, contribute to their 401ks, and have a good house? Is that the purpose of education? Because a lot of times we want an alternative to the woke schools and to all of the leftist propaganda, the communist propaganda that comes through the public schools. And we want to avoid all that and give our children practical ways of living well. But that's not a meaningful alternative, and that actually doesn't help to cultivate them, nor does it help to cultivate the community, nor does it help to help along the actual purpose of education, which is to basically create catalysts for cultural continuity over time. I mean, so, one of the best educational theorists that I've come across is actually just Roger Scruton. He's very accessible, he's easy to read, but he's got, in one of his books, actually in several of his books, he's got, sections dedicated to education. And he talks about what is the purpose of education. Is the purpose of education to, produce men that can make a lot of money for themselves and for their nuclear families? He denies this as the legitimate function of culture. Is the purpose of the individual to contribute to, potential GDP growth in the future? I mean, should we train, students and children to produce wealth, to fulfill their own destinies, to discover themselves, and to enjoy life in pleasurable ways? And he denies all of these very modernist alternatives, and he comes down on the fact that it's actually not about the child. The child is basically exists to help further culture, and that's what they are. There are moments in time that the past can come alive to the present and be there in a way that's meaningful for history, but that can outlast even their lives. And that's the purpose of education, is to create catalysts for cultural continuity. And so like with that sort of framing in mind, I wanted to open it up to a discussion. We'll get to it in a minute, but I don't know if Jared has any thoughts first.
I think not much besides just really thinking through what that means. I think we could hear what C.J. just said and kind of nod along to it, but not really grasp the implications for that. What does it mean to say that education is actually not just for the child? Okay, so but is a means of cultural continuity. In other words, the point is not to educate a child so that the child can go and just realize themselves, make their own decisions. They're being educated with a kind of duty to carry on. Okay, and so what does that mean when we talk about education and having a bias? So I've heard it from so many times from, there's lots of homeschoolers and groups that want to get out of, a public school because I don't want my child to be what?
Indoctrinated.
Well, that's a newer one. That's true. I hear woke and gay,
So true.
but that's not traditionally over the. It's relevant. What is the word? Somebody said it though.
Indoctrinated.
Indoctrinated, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of Christians who have this idea of, I want to get my child out of the public school so that they are not indoctrinated, because we don't want children to have a particular doctrine. Is that the goal? So that, and then I hear people, I've heard this many times in a range of contexts from homeschoolers or whoever over the years saying, well, we were using this curriculum or we were using this textbook, but we didn't like that program because it came off biased. Okay. And they mean that in a negative way. Biased as in, it had evolution in it, or it was biased American history or something, that was biased in a certain direction. The goal we're fighting here, or the goal we're aiming at here, is not anti-bias. Okay? We're not trying to get back to some kind of neutral world utopia where just the facts, please. Just the facts, ma'am, from the movie. Just the facts. This is what got us into the mess we're in. So what we need is a kind of indoctrination of our own. And it doesn't mean program. And the thing is, why that scares a lot of people, that they would indoctrinate their kids, is I think part of what C.J. was talking about this morning is because we can only think of indoctrination in terms of technocracy. So you're programming. We have this mechanical mindset that indoctrination means they're programming my kid, and I would never want to program my kid. Okay? But if we can get out of the technical, mechanical approach to education and think in terms of indoctrination, but what does that mean? Does that mean you can't think? Does that mean you turn them into a robot? Of course not. But there should be a bias built into our goal of education. And so what does that bias look like, and why do we want this? Because we're not trying to just create a bunch of free thinkers. We are trying to create continuity and maintain continuity with the past and to pass it forward into the future.
Let me just riff on that for a second, because I think a lot of like theonomist types, right? They'll talk about how we need a Christian alternative education, but for them, there's actually no cultural relevance, and so you could have a wide variety of cultures, within one community, and as long as their facts are Christian, as long as they're derived from proper exegesis or whatever, then it's a good education. But I'm trying to look broader than that. I'm trying to defend the idea of educating children and our community and others around us in ways that basically uphold the goodness of our civilization, so that we don't have to be presentists. The point of a Christian education should not be me and the Bible. in my community. It should be like me in light of history and the history of Christendom and the development of Christian civilization over time. And I think that's what it means to have, like an adherence to and to uphold the goodness of, our own culture. And so in the West, we should be catalysts of Western culture. And I think that in other societies, they should be catalysts of their own culture, because culture is something that's natural, and there's certain obligations and duties that are in nature that we as men, as human beings, not just as Christians, but as human beings, we have the obligation and duty to be catalysts for cultural continuity over time. And so, like, I have like this, Christian education instead of Western education, or Christian education instead of, a Chinese education. But we should see that culture has its own sanction, and we should defend what we have inherited as good, and that tradition travels over time, and the customs that we've inherited should be passed on to our children, and culture is a means of doing that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this flows also as an application of the fifth commandment, right? Honor your father and mother. And I would say, I'm not trying to say that we can't critique the past. There is a place for that too. Honor your father and mother does not mean you cannot critique the past. But there is something called covering your father's nakedness. And if you don't do that, what happens? You get cursed, right? And so we can constantly have this approach to education where we are critiquing the past to such a degree, exposing the nakedness of the father to shame and bringing curse upon ourselves. And so what does this look like? I'm a history teacher. And does this mean that, when we teach history, we are here to make sure everybody properly denounces the antebellum South, right? That's what every American history student needs to know. That was bad, right? So I started, pretty much all my high school courses this year in orientation by saying, I am not here to give you a balanced view. I said I'm fair, but I'm definitely not unbiased. I'm not going to give you a neutral view of history. And since you're taking this course and you're actually taking it for college credit, I don't think you need to hear me lecture to you about slavery's bad. You should know that, and you probably do. So if you're coming here to hear one more lecture on slavery bad, okay, you're not really being educated. Okay, what you need to know at this stage in your life is why people living in that age could say slavery is good. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but what is their perspective? Okay. Because you're getting nowhere by simply repeating the mantra, here's why slavery is so bad. Okay? If you understand where, and in terms of critique, how does this look in terms of critique? How can we do critique rightly? Well, if you understand the context in which, say, something like slavery could be established and defended, you actually learn how to say, if this is wrong, but I see reasonably how they got to that point, you're going to be much more open and awake to the fact how you can rationalize to get to a particular evil in your own day, and it looks completely plausible to you. But if you cut that off from the past and you're only supposed to learn, this is what the mistakes of everybody in the past, and here's why we can't do that anymore, and this is why we're so much better and morally superior, we fall in to our own rationalization of things that should not be tolerated today. So take an example of abortion. That would be an easy one for Christians. But there's others in terms of uses of technology that we rationalize today that can lead to some pretty bad places. And we can't see anything wrong with it. And we won't until we're completely dependent on it and say, how could we ever get rid of this? So, anyways, in terms of a healthy, that point was just on there is a way to critique the past in a healthy way, but it starts with actually understanding it and assuming it's worthy of knowing, and it's worth. There's many aspects to it, even a slave culture, that are worthy of preserving, even if we don't preserve, African chattel slavery. Okay, so yeah, pitch it back.
Yeah, that's a good 20-minute introduction. But basically, we wanted to open up the floor and just start the conversation. I guess the first question is: has anyone ever thought of education as a means of cultural continuity? And some of you have children, some of you don't, but just engaging in thinking about the purpose of education and maybe whatever role it can play given the present state of the world. How do you make sense of some of those things? So I'll just open it up to that.
So I don't know if I've thought about it in exactly those terms, but there's been questions of the way I see it, kind of based on what you're saying, is there's an aspect of culture, shared culture, that saves a lot of time. It feels like even as Christians that are rejecting what's out there, you almost feel like you have to reinvent the wheel all the time. You're kind of and that's going to be at the start of any even return or reform thing. But is that kind of what you're saying? Is a function of maybe to put it in a negative way, if you really want to be progressive in a sense, you can't actually even move forward if that's even a good goal. But thinking in those terms, when you have to figure it out first, or even the ideal of education as a means of finding yourself. It's not only to what end, but it's you're kind of left on your own to do that. So allowing culture and shared norms to tell you who you are, and then you could build upon that, basically. Yeah. And I don't know, that's something that I've been thinking through, and you're kind of putting words to some of it in terms of the shared culture idea. As I raise my kids, because I do feel like I'm reinventing the wheel sometimes. And what do you do when you feel like the culture you are now sharing that I grew up in public school, or we don't have something, we almost have to pick and choose from the past, and so it almost feels like you have to start contrary to the ideal, or to the model you set forth. So
yeah, let me two things come to mind. On one hand, you have sort of the dreams of the tech optimists, Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, and they have this idea of education where you can instill in all of these individuals new capabilities of taking mankind to new horizons. And it's all about innovation, and it's all about a newness of things. It's all about the future. And then if you read the book in the history of Europe, there's this little book by Thomas Cahill, I think, called How the Irish Saved Civilization. And their model of civilization was not the rebuilding of something just completely innovative and out of nowhere, but rather the preservation and keeping the fire going of the good things that have been, so that long after they're dead, there can be a memory of those things. Those are two different models. One is technopoly, and one is tool using. And so I don't mean to just take everything back to my lecture, but you can see, just in answering that question, there's two radically different approaches. And I think a lot of us, just being inherently conservative Christians, we appreciate that story of how the Irish saved civilization, and we want to partake in that. And we know that there's something wrong with this, not even a presentism, but a futurism of where the gods and lords of technology want to take things. So that's how I would kind of approach it: is what function are you playing? Are you an Irishman, or are you a tech optimist? That's the question before us. That what are we doing? And that's an extreme example. We don't live in the caves right now. We don't have to live in the monasteries. But what if we operated in ways that could take advantage of the resources we have to have the same ends that they had?
Could you repeat the book title you just said?
How the Irish Saved Civilization. I think it's Thomas Cahill.
Yeah, it is.
sounds right.
Jesse?
I think if I'm hearing Evan right, it sounds like from the perspective of I'm team Irish model, because we live here and now with this modern mess, everything, the burden is just immense, right? And everything is, you have to be a try-hard, a LARP, a whatever. I've got to reinvent the tradition that should have been just given to me as a matter of course, right? And so, kind of maybe referring to something else from your lecture where you were talking about folk culture and then like sort of the noble elites that were kind of guiding things from a higher, even economic standpoint, but more to it than that. I feel like that burden for normal people, like a lot of people are in this room because they've actually put a lot of work into preparing themselves to think about these things. Most people are not there, right? And they need things to be kind of given. You know, this is part of the givenness of the world. So it seems to me like there's got to be an elite cooperation in order for normal people to just survive, or to have anything like, you know, a thriving Christian future.
Yeah, so I can run with that a little bit. I can relate that, you know, we can talk about these sort of things and we can get, yeah, I'm all on board with some kind of class. Let's go do it. Let's build a classical school. Let's do this, that, whatever. Let's live in this. And you can do that for 3 weeks and find out the whole time you've been swimming upstream and you're burnout. Okay. There's lots of people. I'll point out Kyle, who's trying to start a classical school also, right? That thinking about the idea and then till it actually, you can have enough resources and both physical capital and material capital and financial capital and all of that is an extreme hurdle. And you'd have to almost become, to use the word, become a LARPer, you know, where you play the part on social media, right? Of I'm the rad trad guy is like, well, that's good for you, but you're not married, you don't have kids yet, so we'll see you when you actually have to apply it. So it can feel like actually what we want is a whole lot of work without any cooperation, like you say, from the elites. How in the world do we ever get there? And one thing I would want to say, that I hope that this does not come off as as a pep talk, or this conference does not come off as a pep talk, like, let's just go do it, guys. Because I know it's going to happen. 3 weeks in, it's like, I can't do it. There's not enough time in a day to do this. I need a 48-hour day to even make this happen. More time, I'm tired. But I think what we need to, really the point here, is adjusting where our arrows are aimed. And if we can move from this idea, like I was referencing earlier, there's a lot of people that say, yes, I want to homeschool my kids. Yes, I want to, go to Christian school. Why? So that my kids can be independent thinkers, right? And so that they're not indoctrinated. Well, if that's our arrow, and we don't even have a category for what C.Jay's talking about, we're going to start putting our energy into that direction and not get what we're aiming for. So what I'm trying to say right now is I'm trying to lower expectations just for now, just to say we need to have a talk about what is even the purpose of education. And I think there's the vast majority of Christians who are even thinking about taking the radical step of, public school's not an option anymore. It is, they haven't stepped out of that same worldview. They haven't really made a break yet to think about what education is for. And so that's really what this talk is about. And as we can establish that and start thinking, then I think we can start maybe over a longer term thinking, okay, how do I implement that? But if our goal is mere, let's recover independent thinking kind of thing so that my kids can be individuals, right, and not be indoctrinated, we've missed the mark. So, and this all goes back to Evan's question, like, how is it, like, because we don't have anything set there to follow, it does feel like we're just reinventing. Because we don't have something to follow, like to what you're saying, and because there's only 24 hours in a day, and I only have so much time, and I have to work this much, that I am going to have to just pick and choose and reinvent the wheel in some places and play along. Like, so how do I escape that? And I don't know about C.J., but I don't have good answers. Because I can have lots of ideals, but at the end of the day, just there's other stuff going on, right? We were talking about this a little bit at lunch. We were talking about, having evening prayer, around a mealtime. Hey, let's just go let's go have evening prayer around mealtime. Until Monday comes along and one child's at dance during mealtime and another one's at karate and another one's at cello and you just say, oh, that was a good 3-day run we had on that, and what happened to that? So this conversation is going to require in the long term some radical decisions, and I think that's what C.J. is getting at as well. The idea that let's just make it Christian, right? And that'll fix it. Is not really going to. The cultural element is going to have to be habituated.
I want to approach this from another angle now. I remember my dad, like some of my best memories of my dad are watching the strenuous effort that he put into rebuilding old 65 Mustangs, which is what he was interested in doing, being in the shop. And that was something that he did in order to connect with his own father, who grew up racing cars in Redding, California. And I didn't realize watching my own father that I was being shaped and I was actually partaking in some sort of continuity over time. That's what I'm sort of driving at here too. There is something about that makes me want to fight for Heritage America, because I see, and it's not even explicitly a Christian thing, but I'm absorbing something that, looking back on it, my grandfather's dead now. My dad got to live as his father did in a way that I can still see memories of my grandfather that I never experienced when I was a kid because I wasn't born yet. But just seeing it through my dad as a conduit connects me with 75 years ago in some ways, right? That's what I'm talking about in terms of cultural continuity. That's formative of my soul. I have priorities and cultural instincts. I have an approach to the meaning of America and California, old California, in ways that are so beyond what I could have gotten by having 100% answers on all of my fact-based quizzes in school. That's formative of my soul. I know so much more about true America, and it's so much higher on the top of my priority list because of my dad was a conduit. He was a catalyst of cultural continuity. So it doesn't have to be as extreme as that. Not all of you have the resources to run a shop or to do anything. But in your daily life, just think about the fact that the things that I'm passionate about, the things that I'm doing with my hand, are being absorbed intensely by my children watching me. And I represent something that's beyond me, historically and forward to posterity.
And if I can throw out a word of encouragement that's related to that, especially as we're thinking about trying to do things like taking kids out of public schools, whether that be for homeschooling or whether we're thinking about starting schools and things like that, the odds of us nailing it are almost zero, right? But we're not responsible for nailing it. We start to get the groove, we start to wear that groove, and our generations after us can wear it deeper and get further and go farther and do better because of the foundation that we can lay. And so we want to do the best that we can, but in our limitations are not necessarily going to have to be the limitations of our kids and our grandkids. As long as, but if we can get them moving in the right direction, that will help them to be better than we are.
Go ahead.
I kind of have a question of whether the thing I'm thinking about is part of the conversation. I guess I'm thinking about this from the perspective of a woman, which is I'm thinking about culture in the very practical sense of things I can taste and touch and, foods, for example. would you say that's part of the conversation when it comes to education? Or because for me, like that's part of culture, and then how we think is part of culture, and the stories we tell is part of culture.
100%.
So that's all in there, right?
Absolutely.
Because we were mostly talking about the school part, but
Right.
I mean,
This really frustrates me about the modern school system, where it has nothing to do with the things that you touch.
exactly.
It has everything to do with the facts that you memorize.
Yeah.
And that's basically a technocratic way of doing things. You know, it's all about memorizing facts and knowing all the truths. But I think you can have a very jaunted understanding of history by memorizing just facts. You have to taste and feel it. Like, that's what it means to be a human, is to have, you know, aspects of your life and your culture that's sensible. We're sensible beings. So yes, I think that's actually more formative to communities and culture than just the K through 12 stuff we go through.
My brother and I didn't stay Chinese in America by memorizing a bunch of facts about Chinese.
But that's exactly why I'm asking this,
Yeah.
because I'm German, so
Right.
I'm like going through the whole question of, you know, how much do I integrate and how much of my own culture do I bring into the family culture and all of those questions. And I realized that I'm at a point where I have to educate myself in this culture aspect, because there are a lot of dishes that I know are part of my culture that I ate as a child, but I've never made them. I've never, you know, been part of that. There are things that I could buy in every supermarket in Germany, and I can't get them here, so I have to figure out how to, you know, all of those questions are kind of in there for me too. But yeah,
To continue on this theme, I mean, what we're describing here is part of folkways, right? And these folkways can be relatively new. They're usually a continuity with something we've been doing for a long time, like traveling or, you know, working on cars can be a newer instantiation of that. Food is huge. It seems to me that there's a real need, and this is something I've thought a lot about, but a movement in education to really think through, like, we have a canon of great books, right? We maybe even have a canon of sort of American cultural things like songs or whatnot. But what about, like, what would be the folkways that, like, first of all, what are we doing now that's worth keeping? What is a fake, false folkway? Like, Black Friday or something? You know, like it's a tradition that people do every year, right? But it's not, you know, it's invented by consumerism. And what are, like, old ones that are, like, still retrievable? You know, like, what still works or would work if we breathe a little life into it?
I think that's a great question for everyone.
Are you saying I have to get rid of the 12-foot skeleton in my yard?
Chop it down with a cool scene.
But related to that, this another holiday like Christmas, right? There's a lot of folkways and traditions that come up, which is, C.J. and I have joked about this before, about the what is it, the Covenanter War on Christmas kind of thing, which, you know, that time of the year when the woke and the ultra-reformed shake hands and go to war on Christmas. And I just think, you know, what a retarded idea. Like, I mean, like, you have something here that is heritage that even the secularists will buy into a little bit and come to church, right? And say, no, let's get rid of these things that bind us together. Like, in all the strife, you know, political strife and whatever in this country turning apart, there's still a time where everybody puts that aside and says, hey, we have these common customs we got to hold on to. No, let's just cancel all that because, you know, it's corrupting our religion or something if you go celebrate Christmas, you know, in church or something. But that would be an example of that's a great time of the year to stress, you know, no, we got to steer it in the proper direction. We don't want to make it the consumerism that it's often become with all the advertising. But that's a great time of the year, a solid month, right? That as a cult, not just as a church, but as a culture, American culture, we have these folkways and and these customs that that carry forward the past, right? It's I mean, look, we still hang stockings up, right? Why do we do that? Because that's what poor people did, and they got their gift in a sock, right? So I mean, that is an example of there's connection. Holidays like that do connect us to the past, and I think that's one way of one area in which preservation of some current practices would be a good way to continue that.
I think also, to maybe make the dumbest point in the room so far, you have to actually, you have a moral obligation to have fun. If you're going to maintain folkways and you're going to keep them going, they have to actually be fun for you. And if you have kids, your kids need to see you having fun with your people's ways. It can't just be an obligation. It can't be, it's so miserable to get Thanksgiving dinner on the table. Yeah, it's hard work. It's hard work. The larger your family is, more people show up. It's a lot of work. But it's fun. It's fun and it's good. I was listening to Dr. Price earlier. I have enough education to be, familiar with some of the historical theology that he was talking about, and I was kind of amused at we all have a certain tendency to view everything as the nail that our hammer can hit. I don't think you're going to solve wokeness by explaining to all of the people, all the third worlders who are coming into our country right now. I don't think you're going to explain to them that the real problem is nominalism in the 15th century. You're not going to solve that issue that way, but you might solve it with some people. This is my way of hitting my particular nail with my particular hammer. Actually have fun and let people see. Let your people see you having fun with your ways.
I guess my question before came from kind of maybe I'm thinking of it to my question is kind of how do we get culture requires a large group of people on the same train, right? And that's I think where it is, and maybe I'm based on your answer that started it and some other thing, the discussion about folk culture is I guess it's kind of a question of if we start reaching back to our immediate past and even further to our grandfathers and stuff like that, is there enough material there basically that and commonality, or Christmas as an example, that there's workable material here already that we don't have to reinvent it actually, that if we all just start, like you said, if we're all pointed in the right direction, we're reorienting ourselves to, that's the goal, but we still have to focus on what we can control, that a culture will emerge from that we share. Is that the way to think about it? Because I'm I guess that's my hang up is I want the end result. I want my kids to have a good future, literally now. That I have an 18-year-old down to a 3-year-old. And it's am I in just the building phase, or is there, and how do it's going to bear fruit, all those things. So it's maybe I'm thinking too big picture already, and I just have to. Well, I mean,
currently, do you live in a community with aligned people?
Yeah.
You do. I mean, so there's already that community-ness of the education in the way that they were raised, presumably, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if you just look at that alone, for instance, I grew up homeschooling, and some of us did as well. Homeschooling, I'm a huge fan of homeschooling. But you also have to wonder, what was lost in the communal schoolhouse? Yeah. Homeschooling is sort of a state of emergency thing, and because of our public school education, homeschooling became a good move of desperation. I encourage it if you can't get into a good private community or something. But just thinking in terms of your children's formation at the periphery, what are they seeing at the periphery, not just in their home, not just in their textbooks and all that stuff. I think you're hitting on something exactly correct, that there has to be community involvement. And so I would encourage anyone who feels siloed, like I did in California, to make sure that you are taking steps to look down 30 to 40 years. Because one of the best ways that you can act now in terms of cultural continuity is thinking, what are the infrastructural needs of my grandchildren? Mm-hmm. What are they going to need to be conduits of my culture as well? That has to be on your mind as well. So I think we need much vaster horizons in terms of our strategic planning, in terms of our, the way that we think of education as catalysts for cultural continuity. It's not just our children. Where is the best place to be for our grandchildren and for entire communities to blossom and flourish and to continue on that train.
I got into Cantonese opera because my parents went to Chinese church uncles and aunties' houses and they were in the basement singing karaoke. And my father was singing stuff from Cantonese opera. So I asked him, oh, what's the first line of that song you were singing? Oh, what's after that? What's the next line? What's the next line until I learn the whole song? But like you need to have those kinds of things. Like you need to be seen having fun with people your age, and then be seen by your kids who want to do some of this fun stuff that you're doing, clearly enjoying yourself doing.
I think there's also that progression of something new. You have like the innovators, the early adopters, and then it goes to the masses. So I feel like with something like this, a lot of it's really new in our time. So you have to kind of create these pockets of goodness, beauty, and truth, and eventually people are drawn to the smell of the turkey and so forth. Peace.
Is there a hand up over there?
So going back to Evan's question, I think part of it is just stopping the impulse to ward against cultural formation. Like, unfortunately, part of our tradition is we have a deep tradition, as Jared mentioned, of anti-tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got that Puritan impulse to say, celebrating Christmas is a bad thing. And when it comes to education, too, you mentioned, we want an unbiased education, right? But the problem is, there's always going to be a bias.
Right.
When people say unbiased, what they really mean is, it's that bias that I can't identify, that's invisible to me, which means usually that anti-traditional bias in education. So a lot of it is just heading off that impulse to be anti-traditional, and then culture forms organically, right? If we're able to escape that wheel that we're on, that always mitigates against cultural formation.
I think there's two conversations being had. One of them is, how do you convince people to get on board, which is kind of what you're talking about, like helping them to see what bias is, And then there's the other conversation of, if you've got people on board, how do you do it? We're talking about every child needs a village or something, right? And then, people like Dreyer took that and kind of gave it a real context, and it's what we're talking about. Like, you need other people in your community doing what you're doing on the same project, which we used to take for granted, right? But I do think, that task, almost evangelistic task of trying to conceptually prepare people for actually building villages is important, and there's probably ways to do that. I think you're right. You pinpointed sort of the anti-tradition bias, but I also think there's this other project of you've got a locality of like-minded people. I don't really have that, and I think a lot of people don't. And does everybody need to move? And if you can't afford to move, or there needs to be strategic conversations. And I do think, weirdly, technology can be used. You can use the ring for good in this case. It is a gift. Because I'm sitting in a room with a lot of really great people that I've known for a while, but I only just met this week. So how does that maybe facilitate more real village?
Couple. Let's see. What are we at? 43. So 44 minutes, I think. So we're gonna have to wrap up in the next couple. I want to make two kind of quick points, and going back to the connecting with what I said about Christmas, and then also how do we get people to buy in thing. So I think rather you use the word evangelism, and I think when we're talking about this kind of culture continuity, it is because it's not strictly rational, right? It's not a set of propositions. That cultural continuity of working on cars, is not a rational, logical presentation of information. So that means it is, in this sense, kind of caught more than taught. And so, to a certain extent, I don't think we need to necessarily be out there making an elevator pitch and putting on conferences everywhere to get people to buy in. I think, and this connects back to what you were saying about elite culture this morning, our elites are gone. We need a new elite. We need to start thinking of ourselves as the new elite. Not based on income, not based on power, size of our house, but start thinking of ourselves as a culture shaper. And saying, okay, I'm going to start participating intentionally in these kinds of folkways, Christmas, all of those sorts of things. And I think you don't have to then convince your neighbor to reframe education, who can't even get there yet. Mm-hmm. They're going to be influenced, right?
They also may
because
be even
of
participating without even
right.
knowing it.
And yes, right, and never go.
Way.
So I think there is really something to that in terms of like, man, I feel all alone in my community. I don't have a base. How do I convince somebody of my perspective? Well, maybe you don't have to convince everybody of your perspective. Start the method that we're talking is in the message is in the method, in the doing. And so just being active in terms of, and one way to do that, going back to what I was talking about Christmas, is celebrating and making it, joining the neighbors and joining the community. And I think the church, okay, and here's where I'm going to use Campbell's imagery of pounding a nail. So I'm going to pound my nail, which is the church, I think, is a great place to do this if you have a robust view of the church that is enculturated. Because you know what? In our tradition, we actually have a church calendar. We have feast days, we have celebrations, we have times of the year that people can be included in. That this is where, this is a very Catholic community, basically nominally Catholic, and they still celebrate their drunken holidays, which are, feast days. And it's a kind of a perversion of it, how they do it. But it still hasn't left, even though they're nominal Catholics. And I think we have an opportunity to do this as churches, even beyond Christmas, throughout the year, to celebrate and to have a ministry that is enculturated. It's not just, I happen to go to church there on Sunday. Yes. But I think it's a unique place where we can, as churches, celebrate these times of the year. And it's a time for remembering heroes and saints, right? We do that. I don't do it every week, but there's some weeks during our announcements I bring up the feast day. Who are we celebrating today? And last Sunday it was William Tyndale. So it was an opportunity to talk. Who is William Tyndale? Well, what did he do? Why is he significant? But reminding people of not just what's in the Bible, but faithful saints who are part of our tradition, who carry this out. So I think when you are in, and this actually goes to, we're not going to have time to go in there, but in terms of education within the church, the importance of liturgy. Right? C.Jay and I were talking about this in the office a little bit ago, and is it just a matter in keeping your kids in the faith, keeping kids in church? Is it just a matter of more Sunday school classes, more catechism classes, more memorizing Bible verses? All good. Don't want to diminish that at all, but having my 2-year-old who sings the song, the doxology, and St. Patrick's breastplate at home, just walks around the house singing it. That's an enculturated thing, right? Mm-hmm. He's learning there, and he is, whether he knows it or not, being enculturated. He's being inculcated. He's being a conduit of a tradition, and so part of education, and it comes out of even the church. How is the church forming people? And that is more than just sword drills and repeating the catechism answers. And so last little comment, just pushing back the other way a little bit. I have to say this, I'm an educator. Because we were talking about it's not just memorization of facts. I just want to say I still think memorization of facts is really important. That the idea that we got to have both of those things, because I mean, if you think because you never memorize facts, if you've ever seen the meme, Halloween wasn't always Halloween. It was Constantine who changed it to Halloween in Nicaea, in the 4th century, and all those kind of things. If you don't know who Constantine is and you don't know all this stuff, because you don't know your facts, you can take these enculturated kids, and say, oh, actually, it was, they're exposed to the world, and they say, oh, actually, the church decided on, that Jesus was God at Nicaea. And you're like, really? I never knew that. Like, well, facts are important. So you got to have the facts too. It's not just the facts. But this is where memorization of material does come into play. But to C.J.'s point, yes, the culture outside of just the classroom, having the embodiment, the working with your hands, those experiences are also a crucial part.
I think that's it.
Any other comments? Are we good? Yeah, we're over 50 minutes, so. All right, let's close in prayer real quick. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity this weekend to all come together, and for this opportunity to talk and to discuss these things that are on all of our hearts and minds, and some of us are wondering exactly what to do. We have a deep sense that something is really wrong, but we know our own limitations, and we know that trying to change what is an uphill battle. And so, Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to get together, to encourage one another, to the reminder that we're not alone. And we also ask you, Lord, for wisdom. How do we pursue these ideals that we hold in common? We ask, Lord, for wisdom in doing that, and for faithfulness, because, Lord, it is sometimes hard to form such habits. And we thank you, Lord, for, above all this, the fact that you have, as human beings, given us a culture. You've given us a civilization. You've given us parents and grandparents and faithful people in the past. And, Lord, so help us to be good stewards of that with which we've been entrusted. And so, Lord, bless us for the remainder of this day and our fellowship in it. And we pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.